Say a pledge of allegiance, if you would. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The next item is approval of minutes from the February 4th, 2015 meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second. Did you get a second?
No, I did not.
You have
Second? Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Abstain.
Abstain?
Can I say aye,
I can vote
because I
on
read
aye.
the minutes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. One abstention, all ayes. Thank you. Motion passes. The next item is to accept the agenda as presented. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second by Brian. All in favor?
Aye.
All, any opposed? Motion carries. The next item is communications and correspondence. I have none tonight. So we'll move on to number 6, which is public comment, and Mr. Cornell is here to read a letter to us. Lou, do you want to take the podium? And I have a copy of his letter here too, on water and sewer rates.
Since 2009, I've been remodeling my laundromat at 137 Marlborough Street, Portland, Connecticut. I've been upgrading my equipment, all this to lower my operating costs. And with water rates going up, I would like to have some consideration for to lower my operating costs. To lower based on my rate. I've done a lot of things in the past to improve the store. I put automatic sliding doors, which many laundromats don't have. I think I got the nicest store in about 3 towns here, in the outskirts of town, Middletown, East Hampton, and it makes a nice thing for the town, a really nice store for the town. So I'd like some consideration if possible.
Did you want to read your letter, Lou?
Oh, well, I kind of read it. and-
pretty much? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other public comment tonight? No? Okay, then we'll move on to the proposed revision to the ethics ordinance. I did speak briefly with at least one member of the Ethics Commission, and there is some concerns with the ordinance as it is written. And one consideration is to make changes. Another consideration is to rescind and start again. And while I don't expect you to make a decision tonight, there is some information at the state level. The state has a bill in the legislature, and it is, I don't know whether it's going to go anywhere, but it's been proposed, and that is that all local towns would be subject to the ethics ordinance as it is, it's really the ethics law, I suppose, that the state follows. So if that were to pass, that would mean that all employees and volunteers and people that serve on boards and commissions like we do would have to follow the state rules. And should you not be following them, you could be brought to the ethics commission that the state has. So whether or not that's going to pass, I don't know. CCM did submit some testimony on the topic, and COST also had some information on it. And you'll remember when Chairman George Law was here, he said there is a possibility that the state may take this over. So while that possibility still exists, it hasn't happened yet. But I will get some more information from CCM, so before we make any changes to our ordinance, I'll get you more information on that. But I'll pass this, maybe you can start with Fred, that's just some information on the topic. Did anyone have anything else or any research you wanted me to do on that?
I don't think so. I don't think anyone is enamored by this ethics ordinance that we have that's written, so I think anything's done.
It's been around for a while, and I think it probably needs some updating, and we'll take a look at it. Okay. The next,
Excuse me, Susan.
yes,
That's next, you're gonna keep this on the
yes.
agenda?
Yes.
Or,
We have 3 ordinances on the agenda tonight, and again, I don't expect any action tonight or any movement to take it to public hearing, any of the ordinances, so they'll continue, and I wanted to put them all on here tonight so that you can begin to think about them and review them, and then we'll keep them on the agendas as we go forward. Does that sound good?
yeah, I had some concerns about the ordinance, and I know other people do too, but I think it's much too broad, first of all. And I think it also can have the effect of dampening the enthusiasm for people to volunteer, which I think is a real bad thing for the town.
And if you read some of the comments from from Connecticut Conference of Municipality and Council of Small Towns, they're saying similar comments. While ethics is important and it has to be present and be reminded constantly, there is an element of trying to get volunteers and making sure that things are done properly and that the rules aren't too onerous, so that people don't want to volunteer. So there's a nice balance there that we'll need to match up. The next is the review and discussion of the sidewalk ordinance. And I did give you some comments. Again, I think I'd shared these previously. I did check with Carrie Olson, our attorney, again, in terms of whether we should make any changes to the sidewalk ordinance. And she indicates you don't have to do anything at this point. You can certainly make some changes in terms of the maintenance of the sidewalks. The one thing that I do want you to look at and consider is providing penalties upon failure of taking care of sidewalks, as well as such cost that we might incur. And Rick and our town crew do go out and clear sidewalks when they're not cleared by owners. And there is a cost to that. We bill people per the ordinance, but we cannot lien unless it's written into the ordinance. So that's something that I think, in light of all the snow and ice that we've had, that we need to take a look at this ordinance and update it and look at the possibility of appropriate penalties and liens should we need to place them. Because we are doing quite a few, particularly on the north side of 66, and the intersections where crosswalks are. I think some of the owners are forgetting that they need to clear that area so people can get to the walk signals, and children near schools can walk to school. So our priorities are, right now, making sure that safe paths to schools, as well as from the intersection of 17A and 66 to the grocery store, to Tri-Town. Because a lot of people do walk that area, and it's very dangerous if you don't have a sidewalk on Main Street and on Route 66. So we're trying to ensure safety. And I think there's more snow coming.
I did a little homework for you
Sure.
on sidewalks. And
Thanks, Rick.
I know you're working on it, and,
Rick, can I just interject for a second?
sure.
Just real quick. 17-100 appears to deal with penalties and recouping costs for.
But does it say liens?
I don't think so.
No.
Okay,
And
sure.
I believe, Brian, if we don't have a penalty written in specifically, I think it's $100 is the default. And if you don't say that we have the ability to lien, we can't. That's what I've understood from our ordinances. So Rick sends notices. Then if it's still not cleared, then if I ask him to clear the sidewalk or we together prioritize certain areas, then the removal is done by the town crew. And the cost associated with that is then sent as an invoice or a bill to the owner. But there's no way, in addition, we can't then go and lien the property if it's not paid to us. And most people comply, but there are those that don't. So we do need to look at that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, we rarely collect. But I had some time this afternoon, and I did a little bit of looking at sidewalks as far as how many there are, schools, and cost implications. And as you get into budget, I think it's important that you kind of pay attention on this thing. So this would be if we move ahead with a fairly aggressive sidewalk improvement ordinance. There's approximately 15 miles of sidewalks in town. About 4 miles of them are state, within the state right-of-way on 17A and 66. And how we go about dealing with that issue, it will be interesting, and it would be interesting to know how the state actually, what they do as far as maintenance and who has to maintain, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I also met briefly with the superintendent of schools today to try to I know one of the considerations as prioritizing would be around the schools. So I met with Philip for just briefly, and I got some information from him as far as distances that children would typically walk to school, because that's going to be important to you. And just of interest, students enrolled in kindergarten can walk up to half a mile. Students 1 through 6, a mile. Students enrolled 7 and 8, mile and a half. And students enrolled in grades 9 through 12 are allowed to walk up to 1 3/4 miles. So that kind of prompted, I took the 4 schools and I drew a radius around. I highlighted all the sidewalks and what were sidewalks, et cetera, and kind of just picked a radius of a half a mile around all the schools and saw how many miles of sidewalks that encompassed. And it encompasses about 7 miles of sidewalk. And then I kind of looked at that and I said, well, of those 7 miles, how many are bad or good? Well, with that, I kind of said, well, what constitutes an unsafe sidewalk? And I went and looked at ADA compliance standards and also federal highway standards. And, for example, an unsafe sidewalk would be a sidewalk that has a vertical change of over 1/4 of an inch anywhere is unsafe. A sidewalk that is spalled or cracked is unsafe. So if I end up with the task of inventorying sidewalks and coming back to you with what's unsafe and what's safe, with a recommendation as what you should replace, it might be interesting. So I just arbitrarily said, okay, there's about 7 miles or 36,000 lineal feet of sidewalks that fall within the half-mile radius of any of the schools. That translates to about 7 miles. To replace a mile of sidewalk, 1 mile of sidewalk, is $250,000. That's removal and replacement at $12 per square foot. So then I said, well, let's just, for assumption's say that 25% of those 7 miles are unsafe. And under the criteria that I'll be looking at, probably there's more than that. So you could probably, and again, I budgeted, in this proposed budget, I put in $50,000 for this year. That number probably should be more like 500,000. So 2 miles of sidewalk, to remove and replace 2 miles of sidewalk, if you were proposing to do that, if we're going to get into a sidewalk program, again, you're going to need probably in the range of $500,000 to do, if we assume that 1/4 of those 7 miles is bad at budget time, probably they're going to want to think some fairly substantial dollars. And how you might want to prioritize those sidewalks and what you're going to do. So as we go along, that's just some food for thought.
Eric, can I just ask you real quick?
Sure.
Some of the assumptions.
Sure.
The half a mile to a mile and 3/4.
Yep.
Is that the requirement that some of those people are still bused though, right?
It says this: the maximum walking distance from home to school or to a prescribed point of embarkment are the following. Any walking route to either the bus stop or the school, which is in excess of the above distances. Now, this was at like 4:30 this afternoon. Now, I could talk to Debbie Johnson, obviously. I've done some stuff before for the schools with regard to requests to be bused, and I've looked at road widths and stuff like that. So I think I don't really know who's walking what and how. I doubt very much if anybody's walking a mile and 3/4 in these days. In the good old days, maybe. So, like I say, I just arbitrarily kind of looked, and it actually encompasses, if you look at it practically, it's kind of where the kids do walk. In other words, if I start drawing radiuses, it encompasses, High Street, Spring Street, East Main, Fairview, Waverly, those schools generally. So it seemed to be reasonable. And again, my assumption of 25% could be off by 50%. So, but I think the bottom line of all of this is to get into a sidewalk improvement project that's going to take you anywhere legally is going to require significant dollars, and that's just food for thought.
Thank you. Okay, so that'll be on the agenda for next time.
I think we have a subcommittee, when is that?
I think it's the first meeting in March, isn't it?
I think so,
Ryan?
yeah.
So I believe that's
I
first
would
Wednesday.
suspect from what Rick said that 90% of the sidewalks in the state of Connecticut wouldn't be under compliance. And I would argue that you look at sidewalks, and some of them certainly are in awful conditions, and those are the ones that we have to prioritize. But I think that also there's some towns have started to use an alternate, I don't know if you're familiar with this, Rick, but there's an alternate method of refinishing and getting out what you were saying as far as the grade and the sidewalk and
There's all kinds of methods,
Yeah,
and we've
that's
used
what-
most of them. There's grinding to take the lips off, there's leveling, which we did at the senior center. There's any number of methods, but practically, and what my experience has shown is that the best way, the most, how do I say this? From a long-term plan, if you're going to do a sidewalk, you don't do a panel by panel. You don't grind a lip off. 90% of the reason a sidewalk fails is probably the sub-base of the sidewalk. In other words, what's it put on? It's the same thing with the road. If there's not a good foundation under it, it's going to move and it's going to heave. Is the concrete good? A lot of your failures are concrete. The concrete wasn't good. There's not enough air in trainer. So, I mean, I guess in an ideal world, probably the best way to improve your sidewalks is to pick sections and don't do a piece-by-piece repair. Do a section, do it right. Again, it's just, it's a little more expensive maybe, but if for the long haul, it's probably how you'd want to approach it.
I'll just add that, and I think you may have spoken to Deanna Rhodes, our town planner.
I didn't.
Well, in regard to Complete Streets and the group that's working on trying to make our streets safer, our sidewalks safer, and so forth, we have gotten in touch with the Lower Connecticut River Valley Council of Governments. And there are some dollars that they apply for on a routine basis for transportation. And that would include pedestrian as well as bicycling and cars and so forth. So we're hopeful that we might be able to get some work from them, Rick, to help us in terms of identifying areas in the town that need improvement or that maybe don't need improvement. So stay tuned. We don't have anything definitive on that, but that might be of some help in terms of just the assessment, which takes a lot of time on our part. And if we can get some help with that and some guidance, that sometimes can then turn into additional help in terms of grants or other opportunities that, if we have a plan in place, it always works better. So thank you. The next item is the proposed water and sewer rates, which is a continuation from a previous meeting and public hearing that we had, and also had some public comment tonight. I want to highlight for you some changes that I made. If you turn to the rates in your packet. We had been asked to take the flat rate down by $5. So rather than $35 to $30. And in round figures, that equates to about a loss of $50,000 in the water area. And if I'm not mistaken, it's about $30,000 to $35,000 that we would have to make up in the sewer area. So we took those numbers and we added the difference, those numbers, and added it to the 100 cubic feet and increased the 100 cubic feet, as you can see in your proposal here. The other thing that we did, if you turn to page 2, in terms of violations of regulations, we cannot issue fines because we don't have an ordinance associated with fine assessments. And the fines were in regard to if we have a water emergency and people are using water when they're supposed to be restricted. Other violations might include not having a proper cross connection. Other violations and so forth are unauthorized use of water. So that has been taken out. If you choose to have that put back in, you would have to pass an ordinance first.
Didn't
And
we
this
have
is
fines
per our
before?
attorney.
Didn't we have fines before?
Yes, and it's
So-
not valid.
So, did people pay fines
No.
before? No one's ever paid, okay.
We've never really
No.
discussed.
No. It's a section, I think, that's typical in regulations, Ryan.
Mm.
So we had included it years ago. And remember, these hadn't been updated in a while, so.
96.
Mhm.
So in updating them, Carrie Olson said that really you can't have the violations notice in there because you don't have an ordinance. So what I did was I took it out and put reserved at the bottom of page 1, so that if you choose to go back and do that, you may. So that section is remaining, it's just not the old language. And then we went through and made the other edits in terms of the reduction from $35 down to $30 for the flat rate for the 5/8 and the 3/4 inch meters, and the 1 inch meters, we brought that from 45 down to 40. And we changed on page 3, a minor change to clarify the, excuse me, the standard working hours under which we operate. So I'll open it up for discussion.
I think this is a great compromise. It's not, I mean, obviously, you know, whenever we're raising rates, it's not gonna be ideal to everyone, but
That happens every week, every time.
Someone's breaking in?
It'll go off.
Is there anyone at the door? Let me check. I guess not.
10 seconds.
So basically, we lowered the flat rate, so it takes some of the burden off our lower end users and it places more on spreading out through the actual water usage. I would like to look into maybe, not tonight, but at another time, about maybe a discount for our higher end volume users.
Mhm.
I think that would be helpful. But as far as this proposal goes, I would like to present this at another meeting, another public meeting.
Public hearing?
Yeah.
Other discussion?
Susan, just to clarify, there's still an ability to lien for people who are not paying, correct?
Yes, there is for water and sewer rates, yes, we have that authority.
I would also like to think about phasing this in over a 2 or 3 year period. And there is some revenue that we could generate from the fact that we're gonna be more aggressive in collecting delinquent accounts. That's gonna be a shorter term, it won't be only go on probably for 2 or 3 years where you might get the most revenue back from that. But I think that would give an opportunity to folks to do a little planning. I think there are people who are gonna have difficulty paying this. So that I think I'll like to discuss at a future meeting also.
If
I'm not
the-
sure if
Can
I
ask
don't
some-
know about that. You can go.
Kathy?
If these rates were put into effect now, and if we were even across the board, didn't have this deficit, would we be solvent? It's still not enough money at the end of the year, based
Yes.
on the usage?
Yes.
If they're enacted.
It meets,
Immediately?
let me clarify, Rick. If the rates are presented and implemented here, it means that your expenses meet your revenues for the fiscal year.
Okay, that was my question.
Yes.
So This assumes everything remains equal, so if price goes up for usage, people might say, I'm not gonna use it, and then you're gonna make less too, so, I mean, it's hard to
There are
predict.
presumptions, there's
But
always
that's why we
presumptions.
raised the flat tax, or the flat
But now it's
rate.
reduced, but
Well,
sure.
it's reduced, but I mean, before it was over 100% increase before. I mean, and although it hasn't been changed, some of these numbers haven't been changed since 1996. It's, you know, I mean, I'm just afraid of, you know, we're already in the red continually, and the whole point of this is to make this solvent and to fix the problem. So I just hope we don't kick the can down the road further.
What you can do is bring it to another public hearing and then make your determination after that.
You know, if you go to another if we go to another public hearing, we have to have the information down that we are presenting. What we're presenting tonight, I made a suggestion, and
Yeah.
Ryan made a suggestion, that wouldn't be included.
No. Unless you wrote the language right now. Or you wait and add language and have a different public hearing.
Well, the language that would go in tonight, then.
The only other thing you can do, Fred, is if you're willing to have a special meeting, we could present to you, to move this along quicker, we could present to you some considerations or some additional language, and then if you wanted that to be included in the public hearing, you can make that additional change. I just don't feel comfortable changing this tonight. So you can either have the public hearing, or you can have a special meeting, make further amendments to this call of the public hearing, and then have it.
I don't know if I can support it as it sits, so I just want you to know that.
Okay.
Okay?
Do the rest of you want to have another special meeting to just talk about this before we put it out to public hearing? Yes or no?
No, I would think if you wanted to discuss that, you don't wanna discuss that right now?
You can, sure. I can't write the language correctly, is what I'm saying. We can talk about it, but I like to have a public hearing notice correct, so that when I issue it, the language is correct.
Why couldn't we write the language correctly?
We can, but I don't know what you want to do.
Just from a, okay.
No, you
I thought there
can't.
was some reason why you couldn't.
No,
do that.
no, but I just don't have it written. So you're talking about a consideration for volume users. So how would you want to put that specifically?
I wasn't
Well,
suggesting that, I don't.
That would be something, I'm in favor of this as it stands now. I'd also like to look at that as well, but at least get the public hearing set so we can you know, continue and bring this forward to the rest of the town.
What's the rationale for that?
Well, I think that because we've been running this deficit, you know, year over year and week over week, that basically I really just want to stop the bleeding. I
That's
really
not,
just.
I don't mean that,
so
I mean, what's the rationale for giving certain people a break?
We're giving higher volume users a break.
Like
people that-
why?
Well, we have some businesses that are dependent on our water prices, and if we raise the rates, we affect them disproportionately, just like we affected the lower end users with the flat rate disproportionately, and that's why we revised the flat rate from $35 to $30. I think that if we're gonna look and be considerate to our lower end users, we also need to be considerate of the higher end as well.
I don't even know if that would be legal, quite honestly, but it doesn't sound like it would be. I mean, you're giving away to some people, not others.
But we talked about this the last meeting, didn't we?
I wasn't here, but
Howard?
if I were here, I would say that I
Yeah,
don't think
Brian?
that's legal.
Since I agree with you that the whole purpose of this is to stop the deficit bleeding year by year. So if you give some kind of consideration to high volume users, what would you propose to replace that income?
I'm not proposing anything at the moment, just to be clear. All I'm proposing is that we discuss it at a future date. I think that it was a good point. I want to talk about that, but at the moment, I don't want to do anything as far as that. But I just thought that we should keep that in mind, and maybe the next time, if we're gonna talk about, maybe the possibility of liens, or penalties, we can talk about other, reductions as well for higher volume, that's all. I like this.
So,
What I'm trying to do is get this efficiently taken care of. So that if there's changes to this, I think you're better off making a change now, if we can. If you don't feel comfortable making it now, you can send this to a public hearing, but there's a 7-day notice requirement. And then if you make substantive changes subsequent to that public hearing, then you have to go to another public hearing, because you can't pass this change without a public hearing. A substantive change, you have to have if it's just a little bit of language change, that's fine. So if you could agree that there's no changes, that's great. If you can agree you want changes, I'm willing to have a special meeting that we can talk about that and get this done.
Maybe we can just take a consensus. I mean, it's my sense, I understand where you're coming from, Fred. And I would think typically if you're increasing rates as drastically as we are, you might consider that. But to me, I think that, I've always looked at it as if people have not been paying their fair share essentially for years, and new people are now paying for the people's usage for years. So to me, we're in the red. I think it needs to be brought up and just taken care of now, and I don't think we should phase this in over any period of time. That's my sense of it. I don't know if anybody else feels that way. If not, then I would suggest that we consider Fred's language, adding it in so we can expedite things and move along.
As I looked at it, the fact that we are reducing it by $5 is a good thing. But when you think about it, we're also increasing, so it's a wash. We went from 388 to 462. So there is some relief, and we address the concerns to a small degree of some of the people, but we haven't really done anything in terms of a reduction in cost. And that's why I thought maybe by going to a phase, and at least give people an opportunity, and they could do a little bit of planning for the next, getting whacked with the next bill. And to me, it would just be, if we did it in a 2-year, you take the effective date, all you need is the effective date when you wanted this to go into effect. And you put a percentage in of that increase, whether it was, for sake of discussion, a 50% increase, and then the following year it would be phased in all the way. Yeah, we'll be in the red a little bit, but we're also going to be making up a little money, I think, with the collections from the people who are not paying their bill and their fair share. So, I don't know, I think it would be personally a nice thing for people that it's not, at least it gives them a little relief in terms of planning for this.
The other thing that you have to remember is you can revisit rates at any time. They don't have to be revisited every 10 years or every
Yeah, we
year.
can't let this happen
They can be
again.
revisited, and they should be revisited frequently. You have requested that we reduce the base fee by $5, so we've done that. You know the effect of that. It's a reduction of $50,000. If, as Fred is indicating, we're able to collect, that will help the first year, because your revenue will increase with the receivables being received. But the second year, you don't have as much receivables, because you've already collected, and hopefully you're keeping current. So at that point, you could revisit and bring the 100 cubic feet rate back up.
But we're
Why do we
already-
think the collection rate's gonna get better?
Because I think we're talking about this quite a bit. I think that people understand, and you, as a board, as the water authority, understand that as people are not paying their bills, we'll have a better support from you in terms of water shutoffs, or support from you in terms of selling of tax liens, and so forth. But it could go the other way too,
But from a
Brian.
tax lien standpoint, the numbers generally, I assume, correct me if I'm wrong,
Yep.
are not high enough really to go down that way, correct? I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Some
So-
are, and most are not, right? And when you raise these rates to the level, whatever the level might be, you may see an increase in receivables. That's why I think there is some validity to what Fred is saying, because there's a balancing act, and we don't know where that is at this point.
I can agree with you, Fred, but it just doesn't seem fair to me, to some kid who decides to move into town, you know, next year and buy a house, et cetera, that you're essentially asking him to subsidize other people's use of water, because you're not charging. I mean, he's gonna have to pay for water that somebody used for the last 15, 20 years. I mean, everybody who's moved into this town is paying for water for people. It doesn't make sense. I mean, you're using the water, you should pay for it. It's just, you know.
I mean, don't forget, we're still at a deficit to begin with. We're already down. I mean, what's the amount, Susan, do you know? How much, what our deficit is?
I don't have the
in water and
papers with
sewer?
me.
Isn't it several $100,000, right?
It's 200.
So any collections that we do get, I'd like to put to the, to what we're already in the hole for. And then at least, I mean, I know what you're saying, Fred. I mean, I really would love to be able to phase this in, but our job is to balance the budget. And I don't think it's responsible on our part if we don't balance the budget. And we tried phasing something in 4 or 5 years ago, if you recall, and then we kind of like slipped one year, you know, last year, and we're still running the red. So I mean, it stinks. There's no other way around it. But I just
Well,
don't
a
see.
compromise would be to put what's in front of you to a public hearing. And if there's additional comments and you want to make substantive changes, you can that night. I will attempt to bring some language that's been reflected here tonight. I don't want to stop the process. I want to move this along. Adoption isn't imminent with a public hearing. It's up to you, the authority, as to whether you want to adopt or not. If you were to have a public hearing, probably the 4th of March, we could accommodate. And it would probably be at 7:30, just before our meeting, because you have 7 o'clock sidewalk subcommittee that night. So what's your pleasure?
I think we probably should do that. I'm concerned we're just so far behind, you know, in the water budget. I think that that's the hardest part, that it's gonna take a long time to make this up. And I do have one question on
Yep.
A.9.4. There's one item, I don't think the new rate is in there. Unless I have it.
What it's supposed to say, Kathy, is water used from a hydrant will be metered and charged for at the current rate. And we're just not putting it in there.
Whatever that rate is
Yes.
when we decide, okay.
Because that will change all the time. So we took out what it had been. So what do you want to do, folks?
Public hearing.
Do you want to make that a motion?
I move to have a public hearing on the proposed ordinance March 4th at 7 p.m. Or what time is it?
Can you have it at 7 and have the sidewalk earlier, or is there a reason why the sidewalk can't be at 6?
There is an economic development awards night that night at 6 o'clock. Is that right, Mary? 6:30. So you could have your sidewalk meeting at 6, if you can. Or you can wait on
I'll try.
6 for the sidewalk? Okay. So 6 for the sidewalk. 6:30 is the EDC, and then 7 will be the public hearing, if there is a second to that.
Second.
And the discussion, I will say that as presented tonight will be at the public hearing. And then that night, it'll be on your agenda, and you can choose to make additional changes if you want to. Fred?
No, I have no other comments, but I do, you know how I feel. I think that this has been going on for a long time, and we know that, all of you are aware of that. But if it were to be phased in, the impact the first year, I don't think would be that significant. The rates would kick in the second, and you would be on schedule to pay back. This has been going on for a long time, and we've managed to survive this long. So
Mhm.
if we were to go another year, I don't think it would really be a problem.
Is there any support to putting that in the meeting?
I don't care if you want to make it part of it, sure, that's fine.
The rest, what do you want to do?
Have the hearing.
Okay.
Mhm.
As presented? Kathy?
I mean, I don't agree with that. I mean, if Fred wanted to do it, I mean, it's fine, but otherwise, I would say as presented.
I'll call for the vote.
There.
All in favor of the public hearing as presented? There's been a motion that's been seconded. Aye?
Aye.
Nay.
I'm voting nay. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 yeses and 2 noes.
Who was the other no?
Me.
Oh, you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Motion carries. All right, so we can move on, right?
Correct.
Okay. Appointments to boards and commissions. Are there any appointments tonight?
No.
I just want to have the record reflect that Betty Janik resigned from Planning and Zoning, and I want to thank her for her years. She was chairman of Planning and Zoning and really did a fine job. We'll miss her. She's a regular member right now, so if anyone's interested in being on Planning and Zoning, we have openings.
Volunteer right away, 'cause there's probably gonna be a long line.
That's right. That's right. It's a good commission. Okay, new business. We have a guest here tonight. Dan Bertram is here tonight, and he is going to be, do you want to go to the podium, Dan, and speak to us as to an application that Dan has made for fixing real property assessment. Welcome.
All right, thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
All right, so we are here about Portland Town Place, and I had dropped by a previous meeting to kind of say hello and to kind of gauge the general mood, and I met first with Susan and various members of the team, and essentially had concluded that everybody's aligned in trying to have something happen at this project. And so it had been brought to our attention, and we've looked at it, and we're interested in moving forward with it. I represent an organization out of Danbury, Connecticut, called BRT General Corporation. We will be partnering with a company called the DeMarco Group out of Rochester, New York, and we each have respective core disciplines, both in retail and multifamily development. So what we had put together, based on things we've done in other Connecticut towns, was an application to describe essentially what we look at as a public-private partnership. And along the lines of whenever you come into a project, especially one that's been out there for as long as this has, you have to kind of see what all the moving pieces are. And so we're sort of stopping, this is one of the first stops on the bus, if you will, to get the process of this parcel being developed going. So along those lines, we're starting with a development plan that's about 150,000 square feet of commercial space, 81 residential units. We have essentially this master plan that we've referred to, but also then almost immediately gone to a reference to modifications, because there's, even in the best case scenarios, when you go out to market, especially on the retail side, you get market feedback and you need to make changes because the prospective tenant would like to see one thing or another. And that process is something that you essentially try to assess on the front side from our perspective as one that we have alignment with the town. And so along those lines, we're calculating the improvements for this project to exceed $20 million by any calculation. Anything that would get a green light to develop this property is on that order of magnitude. So from the standpoint of what you have before you, what we're asking for is a authorization for the first selectman to enter an agreement with us that would essentially defer the assessment increase related to improvements on the property, knowing that along the way, this master plan is a guide. It'll be substantially what needs to go on, because that's kind of the size of the project that makes it pencil out and work. But we're asking for what you have in your ordinance to say a 7-year deferral of assessment increase. So that, I would say, are some of the major points. I think that I can go through all of the parameters that I have left on the sheet here, I guess, if you like.
Sure.
Because it's an entitled project, we believe that we can get this process going more quickly than not. We do have a consultant review that's going on with in mind to protect historic buildings and things like that, and we hope to find a balance both between the preservation of the character of the town, the historical buildings on the site, and the economic realities of making something happen, which in Connecticut can be daunting at times based on our overall growth rates. But we like the town, and we've had a very nice interaction thus far with everyone we've interacted with, and so we look at this as something that, frankly, while it's a 15-acre site and there's a fair bit of square footage and use, no one component of the development is so large that we wouldn't want to get in and build it out. And so that's the way we're looking at this project. And so we propose a 5 years for developing the project, but anticipate a 3.5. If you were to ask me how long do you think this will take, I would say from now it'd be 3.5 years.
I didn't understand. Your suggestion is that you're doing it piecemeal, or you're not doing it?
We're not doing it piecemeal because we see that there's not enough risk in any one component of the job, because there are different uses. There's retail and commercial and multifamily, that kind of thing. And so once you get the critical mass, I'll tell you that our process is, it's essentially to market it so that you have enough of the retail component that you have a green light on that part. We feel comfortable with the multifamily side. This is something that's particularly a core strength of our organization. And so the focus really is on putting as many things together so that we can start the marketing process for the retail commercial side of the job. And so we have begun that process loosely, but we would, with knowing that we're all in alignment, do that a little more robustly in the timelines, like I say. We guess about 3.5 years. On the mechanics, I referenced the 7-year deferral assignment. Those get to the second page of our application is a little bit more detailed and not terribly important to the overall scheme of things. So from the standpoint of really what do we assess when we come into a town, it's can we work with the town to have a successful development? Because there are always moving pieces. The economy can change, we've lived through that, and on the backside of a recovery, you're often speculating on the green shoots, right? You say, hey, I think that looks like an actionable scenario. We feel that way about this project, but we need help. And so that's why we're here asking for a partnership with you to make it happen.
We'll open it up for some questions, comments?
This, map that we have here,
Mhm.
and I'm trying to see, I think it says from 2012, would you have changes to this that you would bring forward?
What we would like to do, let me tell you how we view it. This is a master plan that says, essentially, here's a project and it's of this size, right? You take that and that drives a pro forma that you would then go off and do your financing with, and you would take, and it would be the context, it would be the starting point to market the property to individual tenants. In that process, somebody's going to want to change something. And so you have to come back and make a change, and typically that process is done with the zoning commission, not so much a board of selectmen for an economic incentive. The economic incentive typically has size of investment, timelines for performance, things like that, but not necessarily a detailed development plan because of the dynamic nature. So from your side of things, you're picking your partners, right? You're saying, well, geez, I want to give this guy a tax incentive, right? That's your side of it. My side of it is, do I want to come to this town and beat my head against the wall, or do I want to work with folks? And so the process is where we're asking to say, if we make these investments on this timeline, then will you give us this to work with to facilitate the marketing of the property? That kind of thing.
My reason for asking was not to have detailed, whatever.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, but, I read a lot that they're getting away from these larger anchor stores, and that was my only reason for
No,
asking.
I understand. And I don't mean to be evasive, I don't know.
Okay.
And that's the reality of it. And so we have started conversations with folks, but we don't have anything that's really meaty. Certainly we have nothing in the form of an anchor that we feel, oh, they're just itching to come. We have to go out and sell. I mean, that's the reality of it. And that will take the form. One thing that Susan and I talked about prior to this, because I grew up in New England and I understand towns and the character of them. And so we shared different anecdotes about things. I mean, we have a project we're building now with the same group, where the most important thing to the town was keeping a barn in place, right? And it wasn't necessarily in place, but preserved in the feel of it. And we ended up having to rebuild the barn, and the only thing that survived from the original structure to today is the cupola on top. But otherwise, it's a reconstruction because we had to build it to modern codes and all those types of things. And at the end of it, as much as it was a little painful and going back and forth and trying to figure out how to pull this off, it did give a nice character to the project that's now under, like I say, construction. So we try to find that balance so that it's coming in tonight and my other trips in, it's a beautiful town. Coming over the bridge and boom, it's right there, and like you're welcome to historic Portland. It's all. I mean, we want to preserve a character, but we can't say, here's the way it goes. Exactly. We can give parameters, but there are just too many moving pieces at this stage.
Dan, I would tell you that I am in the dark. I don't know know if
Sure.
anybody else is. I look at this paper, and maybe I'm too old, but I don't have any idea what's on here.
Sure.
I have no idea what the plan is that's being proposed. So I don't know what you're building, I don't know what's going in there. I mean, so for me to essentially endorse it, I think is what you're asking, I need to know what's going in. And I have
Sure.
no idea, so.
And I can't see the resolution of your photocopy there's a.
I see some blocks and some parking spaces.
Right, okay, so let me walk through kind of what is in front of you now from 30,000 feet, right? In aggregate, there's 150,000 square foot of commercial development. It's mixed up between a restaurant pad, a bank pad, a pharmacy, a large box retailer, that type of thing. And so the large masses you see through this section here, right, are the commercial spaces on the job.
So I see, I can't tell what that is, how many square feet that is, but when you say large box, can you give me a sense of what you're talking about?
Sure. If you look at I'll give you this, I'll start with the largest. That's a 65,000 square foot box
And-
right
and
here.
For a dope like me, what does that mean? What are we talking about? Is that a
An
Walmart?
acre.
Is that a Stop and Shop? Is
An
that-
acre, yeah, that's the kind of thing you're talking about, is large grocery store. And so, and I was gonna say an acre is about 40,000 square feet, right? So that, if that's a more comfortable reference also. So you have essentially this being that large a parcel. You have, and again, I apologize if the copy that got to you was illegible, but 14,000, basically 15,000 square foot pad here, there's 12,000 square feet here, 21,000, and then smaller buildings across the front along Marlboro. So along this side is where you have the multifamily pieces, right? So by that's some townhomes and some flats and multi-level buildings. So the reason, though, that I tell you that, but then I say, but, is there's this separate process going on right now. There's a and I'm not sure, Susan, how much you've spoken to the selectmen overall about the separate thread, which is some funds were made available on the state level for a study to be done targeting this parcel to optimize both the economic viability, which is kind of where this thing is going, and some of the buildings that exist on the site now. And to find a happy medium, take some recommendations. This is a step that's subsequent to our conversation. And so there are meetings in March along those lines that are kicking off that process that involves some public discussion and things like that. We are beginning a process because these things do take time. So we're coming in, I'll tell you from our perspective as developers, because we're the new guys, okay? There's an approval in place to develop what you have in front of you now. That's a possible scenario. If you said, oh, okay, that looks perfect, let's go build it, right? That's not the economic reality. If we were in a much, much, much stronger market, you'd say, hey, geez, let's build it and we'll just fill it up as we go. Instead, we're coming in and saying, this is a starting point. It has a certain gross square footage of uses that indicates to us that the town has an appetite for a development like this. Now, subsequent to now, there's an optimization of this plan to make it satisfactory to the town overall, and that can be from various points of view. One is historical preservation. Another is, as you go down the spectrum, kind of preserving the character of it. Another is simply having something happen there that's no longer what it is, right? So that there's actually movement forward on the project. So you basically take in everyone's point of view, you synthesize that into a plan, and you have an actionable way forward. So what we would do in making a request here is say, if we could come to a meeting of the minds on the core parameters for the development. In the tax agreements, there are different thresholds for levels of investment for different categories of assessment deferral, essentially. The threshold for the category we're asking for is a $3 million investment to be made on a parcel. We're conservatively looking at 7 times that for this development plan or any version of it that comes. But one of the things that Susan and I talked about in our first conversation was simply that life's too short to do this without alignment between parties. And so that's what we're looking to do, and it's the only way to actually get the thing built. So we're just looking to start an initial step down that path.
So what kind of statement or what kind of information do you want at this point from the selectmen, knowing what you just said?
Yep.
That the definite new site plan, whatever that's going to be, is not set at this date by any means. So we can't be specific as to the amount of improvement. We have an idea, a minimum, you said, of 20 million.
Right.
And in terms of helping the project to be marketable, from what I'm hearing, you need an incentive to tell investors, people that are gonna come here, that there is some help with their investment during the beginning of their life here.
Right. And what we've done in similar situations in other environments is essentially endorse core parameters of a master plan. This, I think, represents that well. So there's some portion of commercial development of a given size. There's a residential component. So to answer your question, we would like to enter in, we would like the Board of Selectmen to authorize the first selectwoman to enter an agreement with us that hits those gotta have parameters. We can't build anything until we then go before other commissions in town, and namely the zoning commission, and have it approved per the town's regulations. So the process is one of basically putting one block together at a time, and you build up from there. So it usually is not perfectly well defined at this stage in the game. So a developer typically would come to a town and say, here's the general scope, and if the selectmen would see fit, or the city council would see fit to grant the abatement, then we would proceed to the next steps, and that necessarily involves approvals from other boards in town. And that's the case here.
Isn't that the reason why we voted for this in the first place, like a year and a half ago? When we put this in, it was to encourage exactly this, to encourage business development, and it was to encourage some economic growth in our small town. And I think we have to support that, because if we don't, we're gonna get more of what we've gotten the past 10 years or so that we've been talking about this. So I mean, I think we need to be here to help.
Well, I think the board agrees with the policy, we put it into place for that reason, but at the same time, to be blunt, and I'm probably in favor of this, but I don't wanna give you an incentive if it turns out that you're going to build something that isn't good for the town, or in 3 years it's gonna be boarded up because I don't know what's going in there. I mean, that happens all the time. A big project goes in, and all of a sudden, a few years later, it's gonna be worse than what it looks there, because right now, it is what it is, but something is boarded up. So I guess all I'm at, I don't know what you're proposing.
No, I'm proposing a job of similar scope to what's approved to be built on the site right now. And if we want to illuminate that a little bit more, I'd be happy to. The only thing about it, and the caveat in all this, is that we can't then say, and that's exactly what we're going to do in order to qualify for the tax incentive, because we're about to run through a process of public discussion and expert level review to make recommendations to optimize this plan. And so if we were to have the selectmen put parameters on it that were too narrowing and specific to impede that subsequent process, right? That's the issue. I've had this conversation with cities before and towns where the idea is to get the ball rolling. The idea is to get somebody to stick their necks out and put a lot of money on the line and begin an economic process. And the typical process, the larger you can get that initial spend, the more ripple effect it has on even surrounding properties and the like. And so to use this as a tool to break loose what is otherwise stagnation is how we see it as an appropriate device. But nothing's going to happen. Here's the thing: there's too much money involved to just kind of slap something up. There's not a strong economy that's just around the corner to asking for just raw space that pencils out. You have to kind of tailor a really nice solution, and you got to place your bet. And so we're looking to do that in places where we're welcome and where, frankly,
And
it's a
I think I
collaborative
indicated
process.
to Dan previously, what we've done is a lot different than this, a lot different scale. The scale is much smaller. And conceptually, things were agreed to. And then as the building, because it was 2 buildings that were built, as that occurred, then the agreement was actually written so that we knew how much of an investment had occurred. We knew exactly what the value had been of the property, and then we knew what the new value was of the property. It was not at the $3 million level and above. It was a smaller amount.
Right.
Dan. So,
Which makes for a less formal process because there's there's
a lot
orders of
less.
magnitude less complexity in terms of what it takes to actually do those projects.
I got just
Fred?
a couple of things.
Sure.
One, I understand it's clear that fixing the property assessment is going to be a recruiting tool for, amongst other things, to get
Yeah,
to
financing,
enable you to get
tenants,
businesses in.
the whole deal.
And I think there's generally, the board has supported that. I think there's a lot of support for that. But what